Hi, and welcome to One Life with me, your host, Dr. Trey Ahia. Remember, you can reach out to me on Twitter at one Dr. Trey Ahia or Instagram at 1T for life, or make a comment here on our YouTube channel. We have been discussing in our visits this legacy of slavery concept, and we are looking at the psychological impact that this has had to our very day to African Americans. And the last time we visited with one another, we looked at the origin of this word called legacy and what it actually meant for us to leave a legacy for someone, or how that legacy has been left for us and what it means. And then, of course, slavery, taking someone against their will and perpetuating this whole legacy of slavery, has been what we have been discussing and what many of us in the African American culture are enduring today. This visit, we're going to look at how this all got started. I mentioned the last visit that it happened in 14th century. That's over 400 years ago. So let's talk a little bit further about that. So stay tuned. When we think about moving groups of individuals from one part of the world to the other, and particularly across the Atlantic Ocean, it's been coined the transatlantic slave trade. So you're crossing over the Atlantic Ocean. And this image here shows the numbers and the places of groups of people from Africa that were transported across the ocean, the Atlantic Ocean. So this transatlantic slave trade segment of the global slave trade has transported between 10 million and 12 million enslaved Africans across the Atlantic Ocean over a time period beginning on the 16th century to the 19th century. However, it was the second of three stages. So it was a systematic process that was taking place here. And it was called the triangular trade. And in some of that process, arms, textiles, wine, and that sort were shipped from Europe to Africa. Now, enslaved people from Africa were taken to the Americas, as well as sugar and coffee. And that was taken from the Americas to Europe. But what were the actual origins of the transatlantic slave trade? Origins of the transatlantic trade of enslaved people began as far back as the 1400s. And Portuguese ships were already transporting Africans from Africa for the use of enslaved laborers on the sugar plantations in Cape Verde and Madeira Islands in the eastern Atlantic. The Spanish conquistadores took enslaved Africans to the Caribbean and other parts of the world. So many of us have roots in the Caribbean or in other Latin countries. But can you imagine what it must have been like to be an individual that was taken away from your home, raped, barely dressed, sitting next to someone who you might not be familiar with because the slave traders did not want you to be able to communicate, to talk about your current situation? As you can imagine, the slave trade had devastating effects in Africa. Think about the economic incentives for the warlords and the tribes to engage in the trade of enslaved people, how that may have promoted an atmosphere of lawlessness and violence. And then depopulation and a continuing fear of capacity made economic and agricultural development almost impossible throughout much of Western Africa. And as you can imagine, a large percentage of the people taken captive were women. Yep, women in their childbearing years, and young men who normally would have been starting their families. The European enslavers usually left behind people who were elderly, disabled, or otherwise dependent. Groups who were least able to contribute to the economic health of the European societies were left behind. Now, during the early years of the transatlantic slave trade, the Portuguese generally purchased Africans who had been enslaved during tribal wars, amongst the tribes in Africa. However, the demand for enslaved individuals began to grow. So the Portuguese began to enter the interior of Africa to forcibly take captives. As other Europeans became involved in the slave trade, generally they remained on the coast, and then they purchased captives from Africans who had transported them from the interior. Now think about being on the interior of Africa and having to march to the coastline. That's over 300 miles. So you're taking a groups of people to a coastline, walking over 300 miles. Typically, the individuals were chained together at the ankle, and columns of captives were tied together by ropes around their necks, like they do animals. And an estimated 10 to 15% of those individual captives were dead by the time they made it to the coast. Our time has come to an end again for this visit. I hope you consider the traumas that individuals who are enslaved has had to endure to this very day. And as we continue to talk about this subject, you're going to see how it impacts every individual today. Those who may not even be Africans are impacted by the legacy of slavery that we are living in today. So this was a good visit. And so until our next visit, I want you to consider the changes that you have the power to ace. As you assess, create, and endure, you can change it. Remember, you only have one life. Until our next visit, take care. Peace. Life's Visit was brought to you by Big Daddy Beard Gaming Promotions, live gaming, channel, and business promotion. Check it out on YouTube. Have you subscribed, liked, or shared this channel with anyone yet? What? What are you waiting for? Hey, I look forward to visiting with you next week. Remember, subscribe to this channel. Peace. Today's episode of One Life is sponsored by Soon Photography, the media that gets you noticed.